The galaxy was dying, and nobody wanted to admit it. Well, nobody except me, Krelith, Junior Diplomatic Observer from the Confederation of Harmonious Species, currently assigned to the most boring outpost in known space. I'd been stationed at waypoint Theta 9 for 3 cycles, watching ships pass through a region of space so unremarkable that even pirates couldn't be bothered to raid it. My days consisted of logging transponder codes, filing reports that nobody read, and wondering what I'd done in a past life to deserve this assignment. Then the Vor'nathi showed up, and suddenly boring didn't seem so bad anymore. The first sign of trouble came when every sensor on the station started screaming at once. I mean that literally. Our Keltharian-designed alert system had been programmed by someone with a cruel sense of humor, and it sounded like a choir of dying whales having an argument with a malfunctioning plasma drill. I stumbled out of my meditation pod, all 4 of my arms flailing as I tried to silence the cacophony. "What in the 17 hells?" I muttered, slapping at the console with my lower left manipulator, while my eye stalks swiveled frantically, trying to process the data flooding across the screens. That's when I saw them. Dozens of ships, each one the size of a small moon, dropping out of hyperspace like metallic nightmares made manifest. The Vor'nathi. I'd heard stories, of course. Everyone had. Heard how they'd consumed the Pelthian cluster, how they'd turned the Argos Nebula into a graveyard of 1 billion souls, how they moved through space like locusts through grain, leaving nothing but silence and darkness in their wake. But hearing about it and seeing it, well, those are 2 very different things. My primary thinking node went numb with terror. My secondary node started composing a last message to my broodmother. My tertiary node, which has always been a bit of a pessimist, just gave up entirely and started humming a funeral dirge. I should have run, should have evacuated, should have done literally anything except what I actually did, which was freeze like a prey animal in front of a predator, watching as the Vor'nathi fleet moved through the sector with the casual inevitability of a tidal wave. They didn't even acknowledge my hails. Why would they? I was an insect. Less than an insect. I was a microbe shouting at a hurricane. That's when the Confederation fleet arrived, and for maybe 10 seconds, I felt hope. 300 vessels representing every major species in known space. The Keltharians with their elegant needle ships, all grace and precision. The massive Grandorian dreadnoughts, built like floating fortresses, the Pixarian swarm fighters. Thousands of small craft moving in perfect synchronization. Even some Eularian bioships, those weird organic things that always made me a little queasy to look at. They engaged the Vor'nathi with everything they had. It wasn't enough. It wasn't even close. I watched and, oh, how I wish I hadn't, as the Vor'nathi tore through our forces like they were tissue paper. The Keltharian ships, so precise, so beautiful. They lasted maybe 40 seconds before their hulls were peeled apart by weapons that seemed to ignore little things like shields and armor. The Grandorian dreadnoughts managed to land a few solid hits, actually damaged one of the Vor'nathi vessels, and for a moment I thought, but no, the damaged ship just regenerated. Like it was healing. Like it was alive. And then it returned fire, and where there had been a dreadnought carrying 15,000 souls, there was just debris and screaming radio signals and silence. The battle, if you could even call it that, lasted 17 minutes. 17 minutes to end everything. I broadcast the emergency signal on every channel I could access, using protocols so old they were practically archaeological. The kind of thing you learn about in training and pray you never have to use. The galaxy-wide distress call, the one that meant, we are ending. Send everyone. Send anyone. Send help. Then I sat in my station, surrounded by the wreckage of our fleet, watching the Vor'nathi harvest the remains, and I waited to die. Instead, I got a response. At first, I thought my translator was malfunctioning, because the message didn't make any sense. It was in Galactic standard, but the accent was all wrong. Harsh, clipped, with sounds that my vocal sacs couldn't even attempt to reproduce. Waypoint Theta 9, this is UESN Indomitable. We received your distress signal. Help is en route. Estimated arrival, 20 minutes. Hold position and maintain communications blackout once we engage. Earth sends its regards. Earth, I'd heard of it, vaguely. Some backwater planet in a forgotten arm of the galaxy. They'd sent a probe to one of our outposts maybe 50 cycles back, hadn't they? Made first contact, got laughed at because their biology was absurd. They came from a high-gravity world with a toxic atmosphere, lethal radiation and predators that made Grandorian warbeasts look like pets. The Confederation had classified their world as a Class 12 Deathworld, and basically told them thanks but no thanks on the whole membership thing. We called them Deathworlders, those crazy species that evolved in hell and somehow thought that was normal, and now they were sending help. One ship? Against the force that had just obliterated 300 of our finest vessels. I would have laughed if I wasn't so terrified. 20 minutes later, they arrived. And, okay, I'm going to need you to understand something here. I'm a trained observer. I've cataloged over 600 different ship designs. I know a good vessel when I see one, and when the human fleet dropped out of FTL, my first thought was, these things look like someone built warships out of rage and bad intentions, not a fleet. The fleet. 73 ships, each one bristling with weapons that I couldn't even identify. They didn't have the elegant curves of Keltharian design or the brutal functionality of Grandorian architecture. They looked angry. They looked like they'd been designed by someone who'd been in a lot of fights and learned from every single one. And leading them was the Indomitable, a ship so covered in armor and weaponry that I honestly couldn't tell where the ship ended and the guns began. The Vor'nathi noticed them immediately. Of course they did. And I watched, expecting to see the same massacre, the same effortless destruction. But then the humans opened fire, and everything changed. Have you ever seen what happens when you throw water on a grease fire? How it explodes, how it gets worse before it gets better? That's what the human weapons did to the Vor'nathi shields. Except instead of water and fire, it was something that made my sensors scream and my thinking nodes hurt to process. Kinetic weapons, railguns. They called them moving at a significant fraction of light speed. Nuclear-tipped missiles that the humans apparently considered conventional armaments. Energy beams that didn't just cut through armor, but seemed to unravel it at a molecular level. And something they called a Mach cannon that hit a Vor'nathi cruiser so hard that the ship folded in on itself like someone crumpling paper. But here's the thing that really got me. The thing that made my secondary thinking nodes start having opinions it had never had before. The humans were laughing. I could hear them on the open channels, whooping and shouting and making jokes as they tore into the Vor'nathi fleet. One pilot, flying what they called a Valkyrie interceptor, actually said, and I quote, "Knock knock, motherfuckers." Earth sends its regards before crashing his damaged fighter directly into a Vor'nathi weapons platform, detonating his entire payload at point-blank range. He didn't eject, didn't try to escape, just flew straight into the enemy and laughed the whole way down. The Vor'nathi, for the first time in recorded history, retreated. No, sorry, retreated is too gentle a word. They ran. They scattered like startled prey animals, jumping to FTL in whatever direction would get them away fastest. Of their original fleet, maybe 30% escaped. The rest were debris, and the humans were already deploying salvage craft to study what remained. I sat in my station, all four of my manipulators shaking, my eye stalks trying to process what I'd just witnessed. And I realized something that probably should have been obvious. We'd been asking the wrong question. The question wasn't, why would Earth help us? The question was, what kind of species sees a fight they can't win and charges in anyway? The answer, apparently, was Deathworlders. Humans. These absolute madmen from a planet that tried to kill them every single day and only made them angrier. A communication came through on my personal channel. A human face appeared on my screen. They only have 2 eyes, which is just weird, with brown skin and hair that seemed to defy their species' own gravity. She was smiling, which is apparently how they bare their teeth in friendship rather than aggression. Still terrifying, honestly. Waypoint Theta 9, this is Captain Elena Vasquez of the UESN Indomitable. Are you injured? Do you require assistance? I stared at her, my translator struggling with her accent. my brain struggling with everything. You. I managed to rasp out, "You just fought the Vor'nathi. They destroyed our entire fleet, 300 ships, in 17 minutes, and you kicked their asses," she offered helpfully. "Yeah, we noticed your fleet's engagement. No offense, but your tactics were kind of, we are the most advanced species in the galaxy," I protested, my dignity finally finding its voice. Elena shrugged, a gesture I'd later learn meant casual dismissal. "Sure, in peacetime. But we're from Earth, buddy. We don't do peacetime, we do survival. And we've gotten really, really good at it." I should have left it at that. Should have thanked them, filed my report, and gone back to my boring life of logging transponder codes and contemplating the futility of existence. But no, my curiosity, that terrible curse of all junior diplomatic observers, got the better of me. "Why?" I asked Captain Vasquez, my eye stalks leaning toward the screen despite my better judgment. "Why did you come? Earth isn't even part of the Confederation. We rejected your membership application. We called your world a death world. We basically told you to stay in your corner of the galaxy and not bother the civilized species." Elena's smile didn't falter, but something shifted in her eyes. Something hard and old and tired. "Yeah, we remember. But here's the thing about humans. Kreelith. We've got this annoying habit of helping people even when they don't deserve it. Especially when they don't deserve it. Call it a character flaw." She cut the transmission before I could respond, and I was left staring at a blank screen, wondering if I'd just been insulted or complimented or possibly both at the same time. Over the next few hours, I watched the human fleet work with an efficiency that bordered on disturbing. They didn't just destroy the Vor'nathi, they studied them, cataloged them, took apart their technology like children dissecting insects. One of their science vessels, the Curiosity, because of course they named it that, was already broadcasting preliminary analysis of Vor'nathi weapons systems to the entire fleet. "They adapt," said a voice on the open channel. This one belonging to someone introduced as Commander Hiroshi Tanaka, head of the Human Xenobiology Division. "Their ships are partially organic, using a distributed neural network to coordinate movements and regenerate damage." Fascinating. Really. It's similar to the Portuguese man-o'-war back home, or certain fungal colonies. "Tanaka," interrupted another voice, gruff and impatient. "Save the lecture. Weaknesses. Oh, plenty. Their regeneration requires specific chemical processes that can be disrupted with targeted electromagnetic pulses. Their neural network is vulnerable to feedback loops, if you can inject the right kind of signal. And they're really not expecting anyone to fight back this hard. So their defensive protocols are basically non-existent." I listened to this exchange with growing horror. They'd been fighting the Vor'nathi for less than an hour, and already knew more about them than the Confederation had learned in 3 years of losing battles. That's when the second wave arrived. My sensors screamed again, seriously. I was going to file a complaint about that alert system if I survived this. And I watched as another Vor'nathi fleet, this one even larger than the first, dropped out of hyperspace right on top of us. "Ah, hell," muttered someone on the human channel. "They called for reinforcements." "Good," replied Captain Vasquez, and I swear I could hear the grin in her voice. I was getting bored. What followed wasn't a battle. It was an education. The humans didn't just fight, they adapted in real time, changing tactics based on Tanaka's analysis. They used the Vor'nathi's regeneration against them, overloading their systems with repeated strikes to the same locations. They hacked into the neural network. And yes, they actually hacked a biological system while in the middle of combat, and fed it corrupted data that sent 3 Vor'nathi cruisers crashing into each other. And then there was Lieutenant Marcus. Wait, no, I said no, Marcus. Lieutenant Jameson Webb, piloting something called a Wraith-class stealth bomber, who somehow managed to infiltrate a Vor'nathi command ship, plant a series of nuclear devices throughout its internal structure, and escape before the whole thing went up like a small sun. Wraith 2 to Indomitable. Webb's voice crackled over the comm, sounding far too calm for someone who'd just done something certifiably insane. "Target neutralized. Heading home. Anyone got a beer waiting?" "Already cold," someone replied. And I heard laughter in the background. They were joking. In the middle of a battle that would determine the fate of potentially billions of lives, they were joking about beverages. I think that's when I started to understand them, just a little bit. They weren't fearless. I could hear the tension in their voices, the clipped communications that spoke of controlled fear. They were terrified, just like anyone else would be. But they'd learned to function through the fear, to laugh at it, to spit in its face, and keep moving forward. Because on Earth, apparently, fear was just another thing trying to kill you. And they'd gotten very good at not dying. The second battle lasted 32 minutes. Not because the humans were struggling. Oh no, they drew it out, deliberately using the Vor'nathi as what Tanaka cheerfully called a live fire training exercise. They tested different weapons, different tactics, different approaches to dismantling an enemy that had seemed invincible just hours before. By the time they were done, the Vor'nathi weren't running anymore. They were fleeing in absolute panic, jumping to FTL without even bothering to collect their damaged ships, leaving behind a graveyard of their own making. And the humans? They started salvage operations immediately, chattering excitedly about the technology they could reverse engineer, the biological samples they could study, the tactical data they could analyze. Captain Vasquez contacted me again, her face appearing on my screen with that same terrifying smile. Waypoint Theta 9, we're deploying a defensive perimeter around your station. We'll maintain position until Confederation reinforcements arrive. Estimated time 72 hours. You're staying? I managed to ask my thinking nodes, still trying to process everything. Well, yeah, can't just save you and leave you hanging. That would be rude. She paused, tilting her head in what I'd learned was a gesture of consideration. Besides, we need to have a conversation with your Confederation leadership about membership. But they rejected. They rejected our application, Elena interrupted, her smile taking on a sharp edge. We're not applying anymore. We're negotiating. Big difference. Over the next 3 days, I got to know the humans. Not just as warriors, though they were absolutely terrifying in that capacity, but as people. Commander Tanaka showed me pictures of something called his garden, where he grew plants for fun, apparently, in his spare time. Lieutenant Webb taught me several human curse words that my translator absolutely refused to process properly. Dr. Amara Okonkwo, their chief medical officer, spent 2 hours explaining human medicine to me, and casually mentioned that their approach to healthcare involved cutting people open and rearranging their internal organs. Which, okay, that's just horrifying, but apparently it works for them. I learned that humans come from a world where almost everything is trying to kill them. The atmosphere has too much oxygen. The gravity is crushing by galactic standards. The weather includes violent electrical storms that could fry most species' nervous systems. They have predators, thousands of them, and they're not even at the top of their own food chain. Microscopic organisms constantly try to invade their bodies, so they evolved entire defense systems to fight wars on a cellular level every single day. And somehow, impossibly, they looked at all of that and decided, yeah, we can work with this. They didn't just survive their world, they thrived on it. And when they finally crawled out of their gravity well and saw the galaxy beyond, they didn't see paradise. They saw just another environment to adapt to, another challenge to overcome. When the Confederation fleet finally arrived, led by High Admiral Zentuth, who I'd only ever seen in official broadcasts, the humans were ready. Captain Vasquez, Commander Tanaka, and 3 other officers whose names I'd memorized, Captain Yuki Nakamura, Major Diego Hernandez, and Colonel Aminata Diallo, stood on the observation deck of my station waiting. Zentuth materialized via hologram, his crest fully extended in what I recognized as barely controlled fury mixed with grudging respect. He's a Keltharian, all grace and refined sensibilities, and he looked like someone had forced him to swallow something unpleasant. Earth Vessel Indomitable, he began, his voice carrying that formal diplomatic tone that meant he was about to say something he really didn't want to say. The Confederation acknowledges your assistance in the defense of Waypoint Theta 9 and the destruction of the Vor'nathi invasion force. You're welcome, Elena replied cheerfully, and I watched Zentuth's crest twitch with irritation. However, he continued, Your presence in Confederation space without authorization raises certain diplomatic concerns. Does it now? Elena's smile was absolutely predatory. Because from where I'm standing, we just saved your collective asses from an extinction-level threat. Twice. Using one ship and about 70 support craft. Against an enemy that destroyed 300 of your vessels in 17 minutes. The silence that followed was the kind of uncomfortable that makes you wish you could fold in on yourself and cease to exist. I actually tried, which is physically impossible for my species, but the moment seemed to demand it. Zentoth's crest flattened, a sign of concession. What do you want? A seat at the table, Elena said simply. Full membership in the Confederation. Access to galactic trade routes, diplomatic channels, cultural exchange programs, and a formal mutual defense treaty. That's extensive. We just proved we can handle your worst nightmare. I think we've earned extensive. Tanaka stepped forward, his tone more conciliatory. Admiral, we're not trying to strong-arm anyone, but Earth has capabilities that the Confederation needs. We've spent our entire existence fighting for survival. We've developed technologies, tactics, and approaches that clearly work against threats you've struggled to handle. We can help, for a price, Xenototh observed dryly. For partnership, Elena corrected. Look, we get it. We're scary. We come from a nightmare world. We fight like demons. And we have concerning ideas about what constitutes acceptable risk. But we're also adaptable, creative, and apparently pretty good at solving problems that everyone else thinks are unsolvable. She gestured at the debris field outside the station, where human salvage teams were still working. You've been fighting the Vor'nathi for 3 years, losing ground constantly. We've fought them twice, and won decisively, both times. In the last 72 hours, we've learned more about them than your entire science division has in 3 years. We've already developed 17 different countermeasures to their primary weapons systems and identified 12 critical weaknesses in their command structure. Zentot was silent for a long moment, his crest rippling through a series of emotions I couldn't quite read. Finally, he sighed, a very human gesture, actually, which he must have picked up somewhere. The council will need to vote. We'll wait, Elena said. But while they're voting, you might want to check the long-range sensors. We're detecting another Vor'nathi fleet inbound to the Pelthian corridor. Should arrive in about 6 days. Big one this time. Looks like they're planning a major offensive. How could you possibly? Xenototh started, then stopped, his crest flattening completely. You've been monitoring our space. We've been monitoring everything, Tanaka confirmed. Unapologetic. It's kind of what we do. Situational awareness is survival, Admiral. And right now the situation is this. The Vor'nathi are planning to punch through your defenses in the Pelthian corridor and strike at the core worlds. You don't have the forces to stop them. You know it. We know it. And they definitely know it. But you do? Zentoth asked quietly. Elena's smile was fierce and bright and absolutely terrifying. Admiral, we're from Earth. We eat impossible for breakfast. So yeah, we do. Question is, do you want our help, or do you want to keep pretending you don't need Deathworlders in your perfect, civilized galaxy? The vote took 4 hours. In that time, I watched the human crew go about their duties with casual efficiency that belied the stakes involved. They weren't stressed. They were prepared. They'd already run the numbers, already planned for every contingency, already accepted that the answer might be no and planned for that too. When Xenototh's hologram reappeared, his crest was neutral, the diplomatic position that revealed nothing. The Council has voted, he announced. Earth is granted provisional membership in the Confederation of Harmonious Species, pending full ratification after a probationary period of no probation, Elena interrupted. Full membership, full rights, or we're out. That's not 6 days, Admiral. The Pelthian corridor. You need us now, not after some bureaucratic waiting period. Full membership, or we go home and you handle the Vor'nathi yourselves. I held my breath. Well, my species doesn't actually breathe, but you know what I mean. This was it. The moment that would determine whether the galaxy got saved or died in administrative red tape. Zentoth's crest rippled through what I recognized as profound resignation. Full membership. Effective immediately. May the harmonious stars preserve us all. They won't need to, Elena replied, her grin widening. They've got us now, and that's how Earth joined the Confederation. Not as supplicants begging for acceptance, but as equals walking in through the front door with guns drawn and attitudes that wouldn't quit. The Battle of Pelthian Corridor happened 6 days later, and it wasn't even close. The humans brought their entire fleet, 200 ships that looked like nightmares, wrapped in armor, and they didn't just defeat the Vor'nathi, they broke them so completely that the species steties to the dark spaces between stars and hasn't been seen since. I got promoted. Turns out being the first Confederation observer to witness Earth's combat capabilities firsthand made me valuable. I'm now the primary liaison between Earth and the Confederation, which means I spend my days translating human idioms that make no sense, explaining why they find danger amusing, and occasionally reminding council members that just because humans are terrifying doesn't mean they're not on our side. Because here's what I learned, sitting in that station watching Deathworlders do the impossible. Sometimes the galaxy doesn't need the most civilized species. Sometimes it needs the ones crazy enough to laugh at death, stubborn enough to fight impossible odds, and kind enough to save people who once told them they weren't good enough. Sometimes the galaxy needs Earth. And honestly, after seeing what they can do when someone they care about is threatened, I feel sorry for anything dumb enough to threaten us now. Because when all others failed, when the Confederation's finest couldn't stand against the darkness, Earth's Deathworlders appeared. And they didn't just fight the monsters, they became the bigger monsters. And then they took us all out for beer afterward and taught us terrible drinking songs that I absolutely refuse to translate for official records, though I will admit, they were pretty catchy. The galaxy is safer now. Stranger, definitely. Louder, absolutely. But safer. And somewhere out there, Captain Elena Vasquez is probably picking another fight she can't win. Commander Tanaka is cataloging another impossibly dangerous organism, and Lieutenant Webb is doing something that will probably give Xanthoth's entire tactical staff collective nervous breakdowns. But they're our Deathworlders now. And honestly, I wouldn't have it any other way.